Hi, my name is Christoph Reichert from CBR Technology. Today I would like to go over landed cost capabilities in the purchase order processing module of the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central product, which used to be known as Dynamics NAV or NAV, which Microsoft acquired back in 2002 and is now a fully cloud-based ERP solution for the system. Landed cost is rather complicated in that the purchase cost of an item that you pay to an international vendor typically is separate from insurance, shipping charges, and tariffs, of course, that may apply to the item, as this has become a rather crucial issue in today's environment. So in order to handle this properly, I wanted to go over a few items with you, specifically how to create purchase orders that are based on the originating cost of the item, not the landed cost. Then talk through the tracking of the shipment in containers or while it's on water in transit to your US distribution center. And then how to handle prepayments from an accounts payable point of view, because most international vendors require partial or complete prepayment up front. Finally, how to track lot numbers and item-related information for quality control purposes. And then how to actually record the tariffs and other charges, which are typically shipping, insurance rates, brokerage fees, things of that nature that you need to add to the cost of the item in order to compute landed cost properly. So having talked over the overview of what I'd like to cover, I'd like to dive into the product. So now I've opened up Kronos USA, which is a sample company file that you all have access to. This is part of the trial account. However, I've done a number of reconfigurations of the Kronos USA company file in order to demonstrate the specific items we discussed. And so you won't be able to replicate exactly what you see here on your trial account without further, having to make further changes to your configuration prior to that. So what I'm going to do is now simply create a purchase order for an item that I'd like to purchase. So I'm going to go straight into a purchase order, and I'm just going to record a brand new transaction so we can walk through this properly. I set up a special vendor for international purposes called Fabricam China. Obviously, all this data is fictitious information. So when you pull up a vendor, you see your regular purchase order information here, and then you have your total document dates and things of that nature. So I'm going to go record a fake transaction for this vendor, and I'm going to just pretend to have received an order confirmation and create an initial PO. So when you buy the initial PO, you just put the item on there. Now I've created a special item number because I want to track lot numbers. So I've created a new Amsterdam lamp, which is a -P, which has lot number information on it as well. And in order to demonstrate some of the capabilities to you, I've also added a couple other options here on the system. Specifically, I've created a warehouse called On Water, because most of our importing clients and distribution companies legally own the product as soon as they hit the docks in Hong Kong or wherever they take delivery of the product, which means for proper inventory reporting, they have to have the ability to print a stock status report, which includes the ability to include this product that's in transit on the way to the US and is technically already their product. So I'm going to create an on-water PO here. Now, in a little twist to the configuration, I've added a bin code. So in Business Central, you can have bins within the warehouse, and that can be activated on a warehouse by warehouse basis. And I'm using the bin codes to actually track the container IDs. So I've created some fake containers here, and as you go along with container tracking, you would just add to the bin listing here, which would be different containers, and that way you can tell exactly what container product is on and when it's coming over and this type of information. So that's bin code tracking. Then I'm going into and put in a quantity. Now for this particular item, to show you the capabilities, I've set up the item to allow for both each purchase or a pallet. So as you can see in this little reference table, the pallet is 100 pieces, and I can issue a PO in either one of them. The default is a pallet, and I would like to go ahead and get 3 pallets of product, which when I translate that out, it is going to be 300 units or pieces that will come into my inventory. Now my direct unit cost is based on the per unit price, and that will come over as it comes. So I'm paying $5,000 for the pallet, which is 100 eaches, and that's the per pallet price that I'm putting in here, not the per each price. So this is a standard process in my system. All of this is standard functionality in the system, nothing really unique so far. The only other thing that I'm setting up in here is under the prepayment section of the purchase order. I've configured this vendor to automatically default to 100% prepayment on the transaction. So the prepayment just indicates whatever percentage portion of dollar amount this will be. In this case, it's $15,000 purchase order, and the vendor requires a 100% prepayment that needs to occur before they ship the product out to me here in the US. So to get this done, I need to process an accounts payable transaction that is triggered by this purchase order. And that is done by indicating a percentage in here, and then under the posting processing order of the transaction system itself, you can go in and post a prepayment transaction. So in here under actions posting, you'll see an option that says post a prepayment invoice. So this will create an accounts payable invoice that is marked as a prepayment, and then requires the payment of it before the purchase order will get released. So under prepayment invoice here, I'll go do that, and you sure you want to post that? I say yes. It kicks off a prepayment invoice, and the invoice has been generated. Notice how the status of the purchase order is set to pending prepayment. Also, another thing we do is we tend to make the PO numbers meaningful as far as the actual number, so that by looking at the first 4 characters of the PO number, you know it's a purchase order that has been issued in the year 2019 in this case. So going back to the vendor real quick, if I pull up under purchasing vendor and I pull up my Fabricam China customer and vendor, you now see that I have a $15,000 balance. And when I click on it, and you'll see under the balance section here that I now owe this amount to them, and it's clearly indicating a prepayment invoice for this purchase order, and you can trace this through properly in the system. So to pay it, of course, you do a regular payment journal. So this is all standard functionality in here. So if I go into a payment journal and I will do a run of a payment through the system. So I'm going to go in here and just record a payment journal. I'm going to go in here and suggest what I need to prepare. So this is vendor suggest payments, so show me everything that's due now. However, I just want to focus on this one overseas vendor, so I'm just going to grab this one vendor ID here. And so this is the $15,000 that comes up that I owe to this vendor. And then normally you can either print a check or you can EFT it or whatever you want to do. So in the system, on the offset here for what bank account you want to use, you can pick the primary bank account, and then you have the ability to select a computer check versus a manual check versus other checking options. So in this case, I'm just going to do this as essentially as a manual check. So I'm going to process this through and just post this payment. So I'm going to hit say yes, and now this payment has been processed and the vendor has been paid, and the balance is down to 0. So now the PO can be processed, and I'm going to go in and go back to my purchase order screen here, and then typically you would at this point, after you release the payment, you would then go ahead and release the transaction, which will change the status to released. Once it's released, and you can only do that after you finish the prepayment, by the way, it's now available to be emailed or sent to the vendor for processing. So vendor now comes back and confirms that they shipped the product or are about to ship the product, and you now go in and record that fact. So right now the invoice number that was used was this, and now I'm going to do an updated version because it's the related invoice. I'm going to put in a shipment number that I put down here, and in order to receive the PO, you also have to indicate line level information. In this case, I have item tracking information on this, which are lot numbers, and I did this intentionally to show you these capabilities. So the lot number is now a lot number I can assign. I'm going to put lot number B-1234 on here. If the product has expiration date, I can record that. And the warranty date may also be another date. Sometimes some of our importers swap the warranty date for the manufacturing date because they don't care about a warranty date, but they do care about a manufacturing date. So let's say this product was actually produced earlier this year, and you can put that down. Now notice how the 3 pallets got translated into 300 eaches or pieces. So in here I'm going to put down 300, have this lot number. If you had multiple items with the same lot, with different lot numbers, you would just create multiple lines in here. So now I've done that, and this is now part of the PO. And in here I can now say how many were actually received. So in here you'd have the ability to say, if less than 3 units were received, you could change it. See how it says quantity received? You could say only 2 pallets were shipped, or 200 eaches were shipped, and you can adjust this, and then the system would of course keep track of an open PO for this vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and receive this whole thing as is, and this will put it in at my originating cost to the vendor. Vendor got prepaid, they sent the product. It now we have been notified that it's on water, and we're going to receive it into the on water warehouse, into the container ID that's indicated. And if there's any adjustments we have to make because the paperwork didn't agree with the physical product, or quality inspection here in the US determines that some of the product is unsellable, you can simply process a purchase return to offset the difference at that time. Now I'm going to go ahead and post this receiver. And just going into posting, post a transaction. And in this system, like in all ERP systems, you can separate receiving from invoicing from doing both. I'll do both the receiving and the invoicing. And the reason I do that, I want to show you the accounting side of this real quick. I'm not going to look at the posted transaction, but if you go back to the vendor, even though I just posted the invoice, quote unquote, it didn't generate an additional payable because it has the business logic already built into it to determine that this vendor has been paid in full already. So if you look at the vendor ledger history on this, and I've done this once before in the sample company here, but you'll see that there's a prepayment invoice in here, then there's a payment invoice, and then there's a real invoice in there that you just generated, and it came back to this vendor, so that it gets applied. I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong button here, so let me just go back and open up the vendor ledger one more time, which is right here. So you can see the original prepayment invoice, the payment for that amount, and then a re-invoice was applied to that prepayment, so it didn't generate an additional invoice in AP, but I just applied the prepayment to that transaction in the first place. So that covers the entire issuance of a PO, the receiving, the three-way matching, the lot number assignment, the on-water container configuration in the system, and now I get an additional bill from US Customs, and I owe additional money for the brokerage fees, tariffs, insurance information, that kind of thing for this particular shipment. Now what I'd like to do is record and purchase invoice that we're getting from our US custom brokerage that handles the imports for us, and that bill may or may not be separated by purchase order. It may or may not be separated by type of expense, so maybe I get a separate bill for insurance versus shipping versus tariffs, all of that, and it could be 2, 3, 4 different vendors that sent us bills, all related to this one purchase order that we just received. So try to show you some of the flexibility of the solution and the system. We'll just go in and say new. I'm going to pick that US Customs vendor that handles our brokerage for us, and obviously get all the standard AP functionality in here, and I'm going to put in a invoice number that they submitted to us, and go ahead and record the charges. So the most folks try to do landed cost, and they do it incorrectly and just post all the expenses to a GL account. And what that does, it causes a number of issues. Most importantly, it causes a problem with timing. So you may get a shipment of 2 or 3 containers and all your shipping charges and tariffs on 1 month, and instead of making those charges part of the inventory asset and deducting it in cost of goods sold as you sell the product, you do a one-time charge. It's hitting that one period of time, and it just totally skews your profitability in the current month and in the future months. And more importantly, it doesn't show the proper cost for the item in your inventory subledger. So instead of using a GL account, you use this function here called the charge item. So I've set this up in the Kronos USA company. This may not work the same way in your system right now because you haven't configured your Kronos USA company accordingly. But I'm going in here and I'm selecting a tariff that is being charged for this particular item and this particular transaction. You could describe it in here some more by putting in the PO number that you are referring to and some additional text that you'd like to see. And let's say we have a $5,000 charge that needs to be added to the cost of the item and needs to be payable to this vendor, V00010 US Customs Brokerage. So this is not being paid to the vendor in the overseas destination, but it's all local here in the US. So in here I could also continue on with multiple line items. I'm just going to do one item to show you the capabilities of the solution. So in here I'm going to go grab some related information, and one of the options that you see in here is this item charge assignment function. So what this will do is it will take this $5,000 that we owe to this vendor and assign it to the proper purchase order and item on the back end of the system. So in here you go to item charge and you get a get receipt line function that will show you the most recent transactions. In this case here, I have 3 pallets of my 1928-P item that I would like to apply it to. Now, if I had one PO with many line items, I would simply select all of them. So in here you can simply select, whichever one you want to do that with, and select, multiple lines. And this is done through select more here and then checking the items that you want to select. So in my case, I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I have a single charge from another vendor and I want to assign it to this one PO for this one item. Go ahead and hit OK. And now it would go in and assign and compute the distribution here. So I'm going to go ahead and close. And it says the remaining amount has been assigned, and you haven't completed that task yet. So I'm going to go ahead and say, go ahead and suggest item tariffs, and it will do that automatically and assign it and hit OK, and that's the process that you go through. So again, by hitting lines, related information, item charge, you were able to select which receipt lines you wanted to link it to, and then by clicking on this button here, you could determine which options you would go with. If I had selected a transaction with multiple line items, it would have given me the choices of breaking it apart by quantities versus by dollar amounts. So these are the 2 most common ways of taking the extra $5,000 and applying it towards PO. Some folks do it by value of the items. Some folks do it by the quantity on the PO. So, and then the third option that we have seen frequently is by cubic volume. Whichever item takes up more space in the container gets a larger portion of the charges. Now for tariffs, of course, it's strictly driven by value. Now go ahead and hit close here, and this was the assignment. And then when you go in and you post this transaction like this, it just does all the math for you, and it does the reevaluation of the item as well. So if you go to the item now, so I'm going to go back to sales inventory items and grab my lamp with lot number tracking, which is this item here. You will see that if I look at the ledger for this under the history information for the item, you will see that the entries I have in here are reflective of many different things, including the ledger entries, and the item tracking would be showing the lot information. The value entries would show you those. So if you look at value entries, you'll see here that we have the original cost, and then we have tariffs that are assigned to it as well. So it shows you a breakdown of how the computation of the unit cost is being done by the system. If I go into the costing section, you'll see here that I have an originating cost, or what they call a direct cost, which is $50. But then I have an actual unit cost, which is now currently working out to be $65. And that's because I actually had a previous transaction that was part of this as well. So it's showing you a different number here. But FIFO would then determine if it's first in, first out as far as how you sell it going outbound. But this difference between last direct cost and unit cost is now reflecting the differences of tariffs in this case, and the true landed cost for the item is $65. So when you print an inventory valuation report, you will get a couple of options here that may be significant to you, but most importantly, you can break this down by location. So from an audit perspective, you got to be able to give you a self-visibility into your on-water and container inventory versus what's actually in your warehouse. I'm running it for breakdown by location to show you what that looks like, but I'm picking today's date and that item only instead of printing it for all items. And if you see it here now, this is the default Microsoft inventory valuation report that can of course be customized to include lot number information and expiration dates and things of that nature. But it has a unit cost of $65, not $50 on there, because that is now your true landed cost for this particular item. As I did a previous transaction, I had 200 in my previous, I have a total of 500 now, the entire inventory being worth $32,500 in total. So in conclusion, we wanted to look through the inventory valuation information for this particular item, which includes now the tariffs and other landed cost components to display how this information will be reflected in the system. Again, our last direct cost was $50, but to further analyze this information, you can go under history and you can look at your ledger entries. So I'll walk through a couple of these here. We briefly mentioned the value entries, but the two other screens that are important are item tracking entries. So item tracking is lot numbers or serial numbers that the system has the ability to track. So in my case here, I have 2 lot numbers that we added to it, as well as quantities, expiration dates, and warranty date information for the item. And then if you go back and look at the ledger entries, you'll see that in this case we had 2 PO receivers. One I did previously, one I did here during the video review. And if you look at the details of this transaction here, you'll see that in addition to the quantity here now, you have an increased cost amount. If you recall, the PO was $15,000 for $350 a piece, but then we added $5,000 in tariffs to the transaction, which gives us a total of $20,000. So this is then recomputed and added to the item. So again, inventory valuation reports will have this number. If you post an invoice for this item, it will show this proper cost. So again, the whole purpose of this exercise is not just to have your general ledger be accurate, but to have your inventory subledger reflect the proper cost for the item, which includes the landed cost components such as tariffs, insurances, and shipping charges and other such fees. I hope you enjoyed this review of the landed cost capabilities of the Dynamics 365 Business Central product. We have many clients in the importing and distribution industry, so we're very familiar with this process and we're more than happy to assist you in the proper configuration and setup of your system. And feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to sit down with you and go through the process. 855-227-0700 or visit us at our website, cbrtechnology.com, and click the Contact Us page to start the process. Take care.